So a few days ago, we had the March for Medicare for All, and there were people who showed up in over 40 cities, which is pretty impressive. I mean, there were some cities where it was hundreds of people. I'm sure that some of the smaller cities maybe attracted fewer people. I know Lilith went to the one in Louisville. And I know that a bunch of you guys showed up in different places. I want to thank you for that. Anything you do that adds to the pressure and adds to the momentum to eventually get us to where we need to be it's a fulfilling thing and it's an important thing. And, it matters. It matters greatly. So there's a little bit of controversy around this. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But first, I want to get to the reaction of the media, because I do think this is something very important. So if you type March for Medicare for All into news, and I did this the night of the march, you get Hill Rag, never heard of them, that's not The Hill, by the way, describing it, Spectrum News, WGN TV, the Washington Post from 3 days prior to that, where they're sort of, I guess you could say Dave Weigel is like skeptically covering the march. Essence did a story on it. WLOS did a story on it. The Hill, Ryan Grimm had Tara Reid on because she's an organizer for it, so he talked to her about it. But again, that was 3 days before the march. Patch covered it. Truth Out had, in my opinion, what I'd say is like the best article on it. The Milwaukee Journal Sentinel covered it. And then, so that's the whole first page. Obviously, you notice there is no CNN, there is no MSNBC, there is no Fox News, there is no CNBC, there is no Fox Business, there is no nightly news of the respective big players. So there was a total and complete blackout of these marches happening, again, in over 40 cities. Total and complete blackout of that in mainstream media. And, it immediately, the phrase comes to mind, the revolution will not be televised. Because the revolution will not be televised. Now, listen, is anything accomplished from this right now? No, but Rome wasn't built in a day. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes persistence, it takes stick-to-itiveness. If you were to ask me, what do I think is the most important characteristic for life, I would say persistence. Because if you just keep showing up, that's like 80% of the battle. Because most people tap out at some point. And so I do want to give massive credit and respect to everybody who showed up at these protests. I think it's incredibly vital. Now, believe it or not, there was, a little bit of a scandal, I guess you could say, over this, or there was controversy over this. There are some people, even on the online left, who were against this march and were angry about this march. And, they were saying, well, you're not going to get anything from this, so what's the point? We missed the window when Bernie lost his run, when he didn't win the nomination for the Democrats. He didn't win the presidency. We lost our chance on this, so why would we waste our time out there in the streets? And as I told you guys before, the time is always right to do what's right, but also, sometimes if you set the terms of the negotiation and the debate and you drag that Overton window left, then the compromise point becomes a hell of a lot more reasonable. Then the compromise point becomes a robust public option or something like that. These politicians need to know that we're putting pressure on them and that we can't just have a pandemic where over 600,000 Americans die and have medical debt double over the course of a few years and have these guys do absolutely nothing about it. That's not okay. That's not acceptable. They're supposed to be representing us, and they're not representing us. So we had to do something. And why not march for what is one of the most important policies that we could get implemented in this country? And so I don't really care for, or even respect the argument of like, well, what's the point? You're just sort of wasting breath. The other criticism was, well, a lot of what was going on in these rallies is people were like dumping on Nina Turner, for example, because I guess Nina Turner was invited, but she already was doing a campaign event for her race. By the way, the election is coming up very soon for Ohio's 11th district. So her and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez were rallying for Nina Turner, and I guess some people who were part of this march were going after Nina Turner and saying, like, how dare you have an event that conflicts with the Medicare for All march? And so people were using that to go after her. I mean, my personal opinion on that is that I don't believe for a second that Nina Turner is against Medicare for All. I think she's one of the most profound and aggressive advocates for that policy. So I do think that people who are involved in the march who would use it to sort of go after our best congresspeople in ways that are inaccurate, I wouldn't do that because that is strategically silly. And it's also just not true. So you have to build coalitions when it comes to getting things like this accomplished. And to be a very like insular, angry, niche subgroup is you're not doing yourself any favors. In fact, you're hurting yourself. So to the extent that there was anybody who was making that argument, and maybe there were, but I think it's a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of the people who were involved in the march, I would say, relax, breathe, it's okay. Nina Turner, it would be one of our biggest champions, and everybody better go vote for her. Another criticism was in regards to Cori Bush. Cori Bush showed up to one of these events, and then you had, some angry, disgruntled person at one of the events who was basically, I guess you could say, screaming at Cori Bush or calling out Cori Bush and basically saying, like, where were you on Force the Vote? You were nowhere to be found. So basically sort of trying to make it seem like she's an enemy. Guys, I mean, the reason she showed up to the march is because she believes in Medicare for All and she wanted to show support. So for her to then do the right thing and then you attack her for, what, not doing the right thing sooner? I mean, that's a little context dense. This is, if you want to really win people over, to be your ally and to fight arm in arm with you, you don't look at something they do that's positive and then give them shit for something that they previously did that's negative. People need to realize how to deal with people who we consider enemies versus people who we consider imperfect allies. Now, I would argue for sure Cori Bush is an imperfect ally, but I mean, I guess there are some people who would seriously argue that no, she's an enemy. But to those people, I'd say, good luck ever getting anything done ever at all, because if that is your mindset, if Cori Bush isn't pure enough to make it into the coalition, then there is literally nobody who's going to make it into the coalition to actually get anything like Medicare for All or even a public option implemented. So I want to win, and I want people to be strategic while also being principled. And, there was another thing where people were saying to Cori Bush, effectively, why didn't you tweet anything about the March for Medicare for All? Why weren't you more prominent in promoting it? And it's, again, it's a very aggressive, you're the enemy kind of tone. And I would just caution everybody involved with the march. We want to build coalitions and get people on our side and make everybody feel welcome. And the more you do that, the less that's likely to happen. So I just think it's strategically unintelligent, and I also think you've lost the plot if you really believe that some of the few congresspeople who are on our side, even if they didn't do what we tactically want, if they're on our side and we know they're on our side and the record shows they're on our side and we've already won them over on the policy, well then, as the old saying goes, there's bigger fish to fry. You should be going after the corporate Democrats who are sort of on the fence. Remember, the original pressure campaign got the number of co-sponsors for Medicare for All. I forget the exact number, so forgive me, but it was like maybe a dozen people supported John Conyers' Medicare for All bill, and then we got it to over 100. Now, we had that happen because you guys put pressure, made phone calls, but then also took yes for an answer when we got yes for an answer. So again, my argument would be, if you're part of a movement, you have to be intelligent, you have to be strategic, and you have to build coalitions, and you have to be willing to take yes for an answer. Don't cast our closest allies, who admittedly are imperfect allies, but don't make them the enemy, because then again, you're going to run into a brick wall at 100 miles an hour and wonder why the hell we weren't able to get anything done at all. So I think that's an important point. But listen, I also will say, people who are taking that fact about a small number of people involved in the Medicare for All March and then making it seem like the Medicare for All March was useless or counterproductive or incorrect, man, I think you guys lost the plot as well. Big time. Because the whole point of being on the left, we are supposed to be able to put all other differences aside and come together on policy. That's the whole point of being on the left. We might have totally different upbringings and backgrounds and religions or non-religions and ethnicities and groups and cultures that we're all a part of, but we might even have huge disagreements on some issues. But when it comes to the big issues, like $15 minimum wage or Medicare for all or ending the wars, we're supposed to be able to come together. And so I think it is wildly irresponsible to take people who are trying to do the right thing, people who mean well and just want everybody to get health care, to look at them and say, hey, since a small percentage of these people are sort of socially dense and don't take yes for an answer and don't know an ally when they see them, since those people exist in a tiny number among the marchers, therefore, the whole thing is like some giant psyop to split the left or something. Don't even come close to buying it. The whole thing is an attempt to get the left to act like the left and to fight for left-wing positions. So, I mean, listen, we have to be big enough people on the left to put aside the tiny differences and the marginal areas of disagreement, tactically or otherwise. We have to be big enough to put that aside and come together for the things that matter. So anybody who's out there sincerely and genuinely fighting to get everybody health care has my respect. Has my support, and don't let any of these roadblocks get in your way or break your will. If anything, it should re-embolden you and get you to want to do the work even harder. So I've been thinking about, what do I say on this march? Because it really does seem to have made people at each other's throats. And I have to tell you guys, that really breaks my heart. Because what I'm seeing is all of that energy that was on the left and was channeled into Bernie's campaign in 2016 and 2020. When Bernie effectively failed, a lot of that anger and that energy was redirected at people who were in the same coalition as us. And I don't think that's productive. In fact, I think that's destructive. And instead of, I want everybody to try to be as charitable to everybody else as humanly possible. I want everybody to, when you have disagreements with somebody who's nominally in the coalition, I want you to steelman their beliefs and their system of thinking instead of strawmanning it. Because we have made it out to be a situation where people who are with us 90%, now I see fellow comrades arguing with those who they agree with 90% way more than arguing with the real, genuine enemies of the movement, whether it be corporate Democrats or Republicans. And so we have to be able to, and this isn't easy. I'm not saying it as in like, come on guys, let's get it together. This should be simple to navigate. No, it is complex and it is complicated. But we need to be willing to be principled, stick to the policies, and stop at nothing to win, while also being strategic in building a coalition and taking yes for an answer and having a big tent that not only would welcome in disaffected Republicans or something like that, or independents who are for Medicare for all, but also welcomes in independents, also welcomes in Democrats who give us yes for an answer, who are for Medicare for all. we have to get our head out of our ass, and the left has been at each other's throats maybe more than ever that I've seen in my lifetime, and I think that's unacceptable. So if you're part of the small number of people who were in this march and you turned your anger on Cori Bush or Nina Turner, they are not the enemy. They are not the enemy. And you need to understand that. And you need to not alienate and isolate people who are with us. And by the same token, if you're part of the people who are on the left who were arguing that the whole march was useless because a small number of people are strategically dense and maybe socially maladjusted, I think you're being terrible and wrong. And you're not giving credit where it's due about people who are sincerely fighting to improve our system and get us to the end goal. Yeah, we all get it. We all get it. Medicare for All is not happening right now. We understand that. Everybody understands that. Everybody sees what we're up against. But what are you going to do? There's two options. You lay down in a chalk outline of yourself, and you whine and you cry and you bitch and you moan, and you get nothing done. Or you fight for what is the correct position, objectively. And anybody who answers, I'm going to fight for the correct position objectively, they have my respect and they have my support. And anybody on the left should be willing to concede that. Anybody on the left should be willing to concede that. You know? It shouldn't make you turn on a Medicare for All march because some people associated with the march are pro-third party instead of pro taking over the Democrats. You know, if that stops you from supporting Medicare for All or a march on Medicare for All, then God, it's fucking easy to get you to stop supporting Medicare for All. If you don't like a bunch of the speakers at the rally, okay, well, guess what? I didn't either. Does that mean I don't want Medicare for All anymore? Of course not. Of course I want Medicare for All, and you should too. So if you don't like the makeup of the speakers, and you don't like that maybe there are third party people, People's Party people, whatever involved in it, Green Party people, all right, well then you get a bunch of your friends who are more ideologically and strategically in alignment with you, and you get your ass to the march. You know? So everybody's got to grow the fuck up. Like, people are way, way, way too online. They're way too online. Minds are poisoned by online beefs that ultimately, in the grand scheme of things, are irrelevant. Irrelevant. So I know that this is probably going to fall on deaf ears, but for the love of God, everybody who's on the left, let's wise up, man. Let's wise up. And what I mean by that is, don't you dare bash people who are marching for Medicare for All. I mean, obviously the overwhelming majority of the people, 90+% of the people who are at these marches are good people who just want healthcare for everybody. Duh. So don't do that. And for the tiny number of people who were in the march who, you know, somehow think Nina Turner or Cori Bush are the enemy, you're wrong. You're wrong. And you're being so dense that you would actively undermine the coalition that you genuinely care about the most, a coalition to win on some of these policies. So, listen, that's my breakdown of the situation. Everybody needs to keep fighting. Everybody needs to keep fighting. Don't let any of the roadblocks stop you. Don't let any of the naysayers stop you. I would love it if there was a Medicare for All march every week or every month. And I'd love it if it grew and grew and grew and grew. But guess what? The media, mainstream media, will not cover it under any circumstance, clearly. Even though it was in over 40 cities. Thousands of people across the country went out and fought for it. So you know what that means? The slack needs to be picked up. And it needs to be picked up by independent outlets, independent print outlets, new media outlets, and left independent new media, left YouTube. And it would really help if, you know, regardless of our personal disagreements and beefs and whatever, we all got on the same page to coalesce around the policy substance. We can always disagree when we disagree, but keep everything in context and perspective. Understand when you're disagreeing with, an imperfect ally versus when you're disagreeing with an enemy. And understand that the internal coalition battles are going to happen, but they should happen respectfully and they should happen internally. And so keep pushing forward. Respect to everybody who was out there marching. All of you. You did a phenomenal job. And hopefully this keeps going. And later on in the show, I'm going to get to the next thing that's coming up in a few months and give you guys the option of attending this. Details to come later, but it's for a bunch of policies. It's a big general strike. And right now, the wheels are just getting in motion. So who knows if this is going to take off, if this is going to, be a spark that leads to something. But again, all we can do is try. And don't let cynical people tell you that you're stupid or dumb or wrong for trying or believing. Because they're wrong. The only way anything ever gets done is if you try. And it starts with a tiny little baby step and goes on from there. And I'm sure that people in 1959 or 1960, when they were trying to stop segregation, for example, I'm sure they felt like, and there were many naysayers who were like, fuck are you doing? You're not going to get anywhere with this. We've always had a segregated South. How the fuck are you going to stop segregating the South? What are you, dense? Well, they got the ball rolling, and then eventually they won on the issue. And it might take years, might take decades, but everybody who tried is doing the noble thing and is fulfilling their purpose. And I'm telling you, it makes you happy too. When you dedicate yourself to something that you know is important, it gives you meaning, it gives you purpose, and it really clarifies everything and puts everything in perspective. So, credit to everybody who marched. Let's keep moving forward, and let's keep fighting. Hey y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.